It started with a man counting his ones. It wasn't a scene from a blockbuster movie, nor was it a moment of sudden, earth-shattering drama. It was just a Tuesday afternoon in February, a month that carries a particular kind of biting, opinionated cold in Ohio, and a man was standing at a grocery store checkout. He had a system that felt ancient and practiced. He laid the dollar bills out flat on the little rubber mat, face up, smoothing each one with his thumb as if trying to iron out the history of the paper itself. It took a while. His hands were shaking with a persistent, rhythmic tremor that seemed to defy his will. The woman behind him shifted her weight. You've heard that sound before. It's a universal language of mod. It is that specific weight shift, accompanied by a small exhale that isn't quite a sigh, but is definitely a sigh. It is the sound of someone deciding, in real time, that their schedule, their lunch break, and their very momentum are being inconvenienced by another person's existence. To her, he was a barrier. To her, he was just slow. The man didn't look up. He couldn't afford to lose his place in the math. He had $6 laid out, and he desperately needed to find a seventh. The cashier, a girl named Ashley, whose name was printed in stark capital letters on her tag, watched him with the careful time equals 0.65's, strained neutrality of someone trained to be patient, but who was clearly counting the seconds of her shift. This is not a story about cruelty, though. That is the first thing you must understand. There are no villains here. Only people caught in the friction of time. This is a story about 30 seconds the window in which we decide what a person is worth, and how utterly, tragically wrong those 30 seconds can be. The assistant manager, Donna, appeared from the back hallway, materializing with the weary energy of a person who had been summoned by a situation she already found irritating. She hadn't been called by the cashier. She had been watching on the monitor, witnessing the line grow 4 people deep. "Sir," she said. She said it with that specific inflection where the word "sir" is doing all the heavy lifting for a sentence that really wants to say something much less polite. "Sir, do you need some help today?" He looked up then, and he wasn't startled or embarrassed. He looked at her with a patience that wasn't a performance. It was a patience that had been worn down over decades into something smooth, quiet, and almost unrecognizable to the modern eye. "I'm fine," he said softly. "Thank you." His left hand remained buried in his jacket pocket, where it had been since the moment he stepped through the automatic door. Third in that growing line was Marcus Webb. He had come in for simple things, milk and a bag of rice, and he was already running late for whatever life demanded of him next. He had his phone out, pointed at the man with the shaking hands, filming the exchange. If you asked him why, he'd tell you he wanted to remember what patience looked like. But deep down, he was just another observer writing a story about a stranger, without knowing a single chapter of the truth. The man's name was Ray Kowalski. At 71 years old, he lived in a 1-bedroom apartment on Wilmington Avenue, a place that smelled of radiator heat and the lingering scents of neighbors cooking. He had lived there for 9 years. A ghost in a brick building who knew the mailman's name but remained a stranger to those who lived just inches away behind shared walls. Every morning at 5:30, Ray's body woke him up. Not because he had a job to go to, but because his internal clock had been set to that rhythm since 1972. He would stand at his kitchen counter, drinking coffee from a drip machine that took exactly 11 minutes to finish its task, looking out at a parking lot and waiting for the day to take shape. Ray didn't read the news. He'd stopped in 2005 and found he didn't miss the chaos. Instead, he focused on the tactile reality of his life. Tuesdays were grocery days. He wrote his list on the back of his left hand, because paper was too easy to lose, and smartphones had too many steps for hands that didn't always obey. 7 items: bread, eggs, soup, red can, coffee, rice, milk, and bananas, but only if they weren't too green. On the street, you'd see an old man in a jacket that fit him like he'd lost weight without noticing. You'd step around him on the sidewalk and think nothing, just as we all have done. But if you really looked, you'd see a man who never fumbled for doors, who moved with a deliberate stillness, and who watched a room as if it were a tactical situation. His neighbor Gloria once said his eyes looked like he was doing math you can't see. But in 9 years, no one had ever asked him what the numbers were. The math Ray was doing dated back to 1972, when he enlisted 6 months after high school, after a stint in construction. He re-enlisted at 31 because civilian life never felt as real or as clear as the Army. He wasn't just a soldier. Time equals 0.7s. He was Special Forces a Green Beret who operated in the unconventional spaces before the news cameras arrived. He had deployed 4 times, but it was the 4th Fallujah, 2004, that left the deepest marks. In the chaos of that November, when the city was being retaken block by block in a haze of smoke and cordite, Ray's team was caught in the aftermath of an IED blast. It was a moderate explosion by official reports, which is a clinical way of saying 2 men died and a Humvee was turned into a furnace. Inside that burning vehicle was Sergeant First Class Thomas Webb, a 29-year-old from Georgia, with a daughter he'd never met. Ray Kowalski didn't hesitate. He went back into the fire. He pulled Thomas Webb out while his own skin was burning. As he cleared the vehicle, a secondary device detonated, sending shards of Iraqi steel into both of Ray's hands, shredding the median nerves. The surgeons at Landstuhl saved the hands, but they couldn't save the steadiness. The shaking started that December and became the permanent rhythm of his life. He was medically retired in 2005 with a disability rating that didn't begin to cover what he had actually lost. He never complained to the VA or the clerks who looked at his shaking hands with suspicion. He believed the men who talked the most were usually the ones who had seen the least. So he carried the Iraqi steel in his nerves and the layout of Fallujah in his memory, never explaining to the woman sighing behind him that his slowness was actually a hard-won accommodation for a sacrifice she couldn't imagine. When Marcus Webb arrived home that evening, he felt a strange, lingering unease. He watched the 43-second video of the old man 3 times. On a whim, he called his father, James Webb, a retired Army chaplain living in Georgia. As Marcus described the man's shaking hands, the way he held himself, and the hand that never left the pocket, The phone line went into a heavy, knowing silence. "Marcus," his father said, his voice transformed by emotion. "The store, what store was it?" He asked Marcus to zoom in on the video, to describe every detail of the man's face. After a long pause, James Webb spoke a name that would change everything. "Marcus. That's Ray Kowalski." The realization hit Marcus like a physical blow. Ray Kowalski was the man who had pulled Marcus's grandfather, Thomas Webb, from the fire in 2000. He had been a legend in their family mythology, a nameless savior who had disappeared into the bureaucracy of classified missions. For 20 years, the Webbs had searched for the man who was the reason their family tree continued to grow. Marcus sat on his kitchen floor, his legs no longer able to support the weight of his own judgment. He thought about the woman's sigh, Donna's condescension, and his own camera lens. He thought about how Ray had been invisible for 20 years, not because he was hiding, but because we choose not to see the things people carry. The left hand stayed in the pocket because the nerves were gone, and Ray was too proud to let the world see his struggle. While Marcus and his father began the frantic process of reconnection, Ray Kowalski was back in his quiet apartment. He put his groceries away in their proper order, canned goods first, then the milk, then the bananas. He was pleased that the bananas were exactly right. He made a cup of tea, sitting in his chair by the window as the afternoon light faded. The warmth of the mug helped the shaking. Ray didn't know that he was the subject of a dozen phone calls, or that a young man was crying on a kitchen floor because of him. He only knew that the tea was good. The room was quiet, and he had managed to navigate another day without asking for help. We walk through the world writing stories about the people we see for 36 seconds. We judge slowness, the shaking, and the silence, never realizing that the person in front of us might be carrying the weight of a world we never had to defend. Ray Kowalski has carried 3 pieces of steel for 21 years, and he never once mentioned it to the person behind him in line. The question isn't why he was slow, it's what we would have done if we had actually taken the time to see him.